But we're all here. We have a full house, and we didn't have enough chairs for everybody, and we have a few people standing in the back. And we may still have people coming in, and this is being recorded. For posterity, for the Pioneer Museum, and if you ever want to go back and refer to it for historical purposes, it's going to be listed under Fred Talks, Lee Ethel, panel discussion. Welcome tonight. Thank you very much for being here. And our air conditioner is very loud. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. John, should I turn that down?
Just turn it up.
Okay. Y'all are just going to have to sweat it out a little bit longer. Okay, in just a second it's going to shut off. A generation which ignores history has no past and no future. Those are the words of Robert Heinlein. We are here today in celebration of Fredericksburg's 175th anniversary. And we have an esteemed panel of historians gathered here today to discuss a specific period of Fredericksburg's history from 1970 to 1992. Roughly 20 years since Lee Ethel he lived here from 1979 to 1992. He lived here for 20 years. When he lived and worked and made art in Fredericksburg. Today we'll be discussing Lee Ethel's Fredericksburg. It has been 29 years since his death in 1992. And roughly, that is a generation and a half. And since that time, Fredericksburg has seen a considerable transformation. For better or for worse, but nonetheless, our community continues to evolve. And as we evolve, and ever more quickly into the future, it is important to stop and reflect and talk. And as we all know, the more time passes, the less we remember, especially the people and the events that shaped us. This forum has been made possible specifically by Humanities Texas, which is a grant that we receive for all educational programs for Lee Ethel's Fredericksburg. Humanities Texas is an affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And here today is Dr. Donald Frazier, who has been our liaison and the go-to person for this exhibition and educational programs. Dr. Donald Frazier is the director. You want to stand?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, here I am.
Dr. Donald Frazier is the director of the Texas Center of Schreiner University, and he will be setting the stage tonight for Lee Ethel's Fredericksburg. He'll be discussing the historic and cultural events developing through Texas in the 70s and 80s. All right. Our second speaker is local historian and entrepreneur Mark Wiesser, who remains to be seated. He will be discussing the culture and climate of Fredericksburg in the 1980s, and who better to discuss this than a former Gillespie County judge elected in 1982. Mr. Wiesser will be expounding on how Lee Ethel's study and appreciation of Fredericksburg and his community involvement has helped shape Fredericksburg and establish a platform for what Fredericksburg is today. Dr. Francine Carraro. She's our Texas art historian and former museum director. 4 times over. And she will be identifying Lee Ethel's artwork and his contribution to the Texas art scene. But also, she will be changing the dialogue about Lee Ethel's style of painting for future generations and historians. And finally, and not least, Glenn tries. He is our local historian, and he will be discussing the historic architecture of Fredericksburg and the faithfulness to detail that Lee Ethel rendered in his paintings is serving a specific point in time in Fredericksburg's history. Each panelist tonight will be giving 15 minutes to gab. And I asked the audience if they have any questions to allow each of the panelists to talk, and then we'll open it up to questions. And I will be receiving the questions at that time. So without any further ado, you all have a piece of paper with all of your accolades and history. I will go ahead and open it up to Dr. Fraser. And if you'd like to use the podium, you may. But you may be where you are, if you'd like. These people have a lot of things to do tonight, so I'm going to let you go for it.
All right.
Thank you.
I'll use the podium because I have discovered that it hides my biscuit tumor very nicely. All right. So, Fredericksburg is one of those rare Brigadoon-like towns that you wish you could have invented.
Turn the fan from.
And you can't really believe that it exists, but yet here we all are. One of the things that strikes me is that this is really about cultural sustainability in a time of massive change. So I'm going to set the table, so to speak, by talking about hard numbers. So Fredericksburg's population today, about 12,000 folks. Okay? 20 years prior, 8,900 folks. Not a huge growth spurt. 20 years before that, 6,500. 20 years before that, 4,750. And then all the way back in 1940, 3,500 people. So taken in that context, slow but steady growth that's probably in keeping with the way the population has increased overall. But you guys are entirely out of step with the rest of the state. Because y'all, I don't know if this is news, y'all are close to some big cities. Newsflash, Austin is mushrooming. So this year, right now, Austin's got north of 1 million people. 20 years previous, 900,000. 20 years before that, 383. So it started spiking, and it continues to spike. 1960, 186,000 people. That's back when you could go to UT and afford housing and enjoy the town. And then in 1940, a mere 88,000 people. Can you imagine Austin with 88,000 people? I can't. Oh yeah, by the way, y'all got another big city nearby called San Antonio with a mere 2.4 million people. 20 years prior, 1.2 million. 20 years prior to that, 750,000. 20 years prior to that, about 500,000, a little more. 1940, 254,000 people. Yeah, sorry, 254, 588, 785. You can see that growth as well. Now it's a big town, 2.4 million. Okay. Interesting. You've got these massive metropolises. Is that the word? Metropoli? Anyhow, big cities that are really booming. Then you've got Lee Ethel's hometown, or adopted hometown of Dallas. Let's track it. Right now, 1.3 million. 20 years prior, 1.1 million. 20 years prior to that, 1980, 905,000. 1960, 680,000. 1940, 295,000. So once again, you've got another Texas city that's going north. in its population. Let's take a look at state numbers, and you'll start to see a story that emerges. So in 2021, there's 29.2 million Texans. That's a lot of folks. 20 years prior, we had just 20 million, really about 21 million. So we've gained nearly 10 million folks in the last 20 years. Prior to that, 14.2 million. 20 years before that, 9.5 million. Back in 1940, 6.4 million. So, in that half century and better, 3/4 of a century, we've gone from 6.4 million to nearly 30 million folks. Texas is growing. Now this is where you kind of have to hang on to your hat. Projections for 2050. Now this may be your children's and grandchildren's problem more than yours. But by 2050, 54.4 million people in the state of Texas. We're going to nearly double the population. And that has all sorts of interesting connotations. Think about this. We're about to be the most populous state in the country. As goes Texas, so goes the nation. With all that that implies. Which means that Texas all of a sudden is a big economic prize to be had. A big political prize to be had. And pretty quickly, California starts to take a back seat. And they're not used to not being in the driver's seat. So there's a little bit of angst going on with that as well. So the next 30 years, it is going to be an absolute dogfight in terms of who matters and who does not, in terms of the way the nation sees itself in its polarities, in its centers of gravity. All that to say this. It's bewildering. When you start rolling out these numbers, they're absolutely bewildering. And all of a sudden people have to readjust the way they're thinking. It's interesting, I've had an opportunity to have several pretty interesting conversations with Californians that have moved their high-tech jobs to Austin. The first thing they always ask me is, can you give my children elocution lessons? I would be happy to be your children's speech therapist, but I would probably be sued for malpractice. But they're just intrigued by what's going on, but they say, look, we like the following things about Texas. We like the freedom, we like the faith, and we like the emphasis on family. So 3 F's that they're really kind of keen on. But they also make an observation that there is some sort of secret sauce in Texas that they don't quite get. And they need somebody to kind of explain it to them. Frankly, that's part of my charge running the Texas Center at Schreiner University, is essentially helping natives and newcomers alike find their place in this Texas story. So, addressing their bewilderment as newcomers and addressing all of our bewilderment as our state is changing is kind of now what I do. But all that sets up where Fredericksburg fits in. Because Fredericksburg is this small town that is Texas, down to its rock walls and oak roots. So, how did people like Ethel? How did people like the folks that are moving here to retire? How did they discover Fredericksburg? You know, it's funny, I've been in Kerrville now for a year, so I'm just down the road. And the 2 things I always get, 2 questions I get, is, wow, we had no idea that you had retired. And then the second question, which I have not, there's actually people that work in Kerrville. Second question I always get is, how did you pull that off, getting to live in the hill country? which struck me as an interesting frame of a question. So started thinking about, well, when did the hill country really get discovered? And I see a couple of points that are sort of pivot points in this story. 1961 popped up. LBJ is president, or he's vice president at the time, and what does he do? Is he brings the Chancellor of West Germany to Fredericksburg. And all of a sudden, Fredericksburg is discovered. The journalists that are here covering it tell Fredericksburg and hill country stories. And next thing you know, people are going, where is this curious place that you're filing your stories from? Well, then that also falls out into the middle of a backdrop called Vietnam, where an entire generation of Americans becomes horribly disillusioned with how the world is all pinned together. And they're looking nostalgically for a place where they can recover their past. In many ways, Fredericksburg becomes an American idol. And by idol, I mean I-D-Y-L. Bad pun. But essentially, it is sort of a beautiful personification of what we dream for. As a result, there's a lot of people that see in Fredericksburg and the hill country cultural touchstones that they want to be part of and get back to. Then in the 1970s, you have a little album called Viva Terlingua. And all of a sudden, the hill country becomes not only nostalgic cool, but it becomes present day cool. And Lukenbach becomes shorthand for a simpler, better time, but with an upbeat, sort of modern vibe. Laid back, for sure. So, what ends up happening is Lee Ethel buys into this. This sort of idea of, hey, I've done my time up in the big cities. These big cities are getting bigger. I want to go someplace that feels like home. And he finds it in Fredericksburg, Texas. Who's up next?
Good evening. You know, those numbers might be frightening, but I look at it as potential sales.
Well, sure. Somebody else who had retired.
Dr. Carrabo, Dr. Frazier, and Glenn. I'm so happy to be here this evening. Excuse me if I can't quite see what I'm looking at, but anyway. I was asked to review the 1980s in Fredericksburg, and it gave me a new insight on what I'd lived through. It's I found it kind of interesting. I was happy to do it. 1980 is 40 years ago, and that's kind of frightening. It's kind of frightening that I can remember 76 years ago in Fredericksburg. I do. I remember when Nimitz came home. That was a big event. But I'll tell you about that after this thing. I don't get thinking. It's okay. By the time Lee Ethel came here, Fredericksburg was already well on its way to become a destination and becoming a tourist center. And I think Lee Ethel bought into that and saw opportunity, and he helped provide it, because some of the things that we did, we probably didn't know that we were developing tourism. And so I'd like to go back and kind of point out some of the things that we really liked about growing up here. And I did grow up here. And I knew in high school I never wanted to leave. We had the oldest county fair in the state of Texas. Now, nobody goes to fairs anymore in other cities, but that was our thing. So you had the biggest watermelon, the biggest zucchini, and you won the prize for the best jam and things like that. So that was why the fair was important to us. We had horse racing. But you couldn't bet $2 on any horse. I've never been to a horse race here in my life. But I'm glad we still do it. I mean, I guess people go to the races because they're still going on. And then we had the Easter fires. And why we let them go out, I don't know. There should have been a big uproar. Maybe someday we could light those again. Because I can tell you as a little kid, on Saturday night, looking around, and one time I counted, one year, 7 fires on these hills. That gives you a feeling that is unreal. And it makes you a part of this community that you just never forget. So those are the things that I remember about this town. And then I remember December the 6th, that was St. Nicholas Day. On the 5th, we hung up our stockings. That was important. It was. I was hung up my mom's nylon. We had balanced rock. And who didn't think about pushing that thing over? How many trips did we go up there and try? There's a lot of memories. And the day it fell, everybody who grew up here knows exactly where they were at that moment they heard that news. I was in Dallas at the World Trade Center, and it was sickening. Now, there's good news about balanced rock. If we ever get Market Square or the Courthouse Square functioning going, that rock belongs to us if we can dig it up and get it off the hill. All right, we had Enchanted Rock. And Enchanted Rock was not a state park at that time. We could go out at midnight on full moons and climb that thing. It was a lot of fun. Those are some of the things that we experienced. And of course, we had a replica of Frank's Cave, and that was our library. Frank's Cave, of course, was a resurrection of one that they built in 1896. They tore it down, and 50 years and 40 years after that, they decided to put a replica. But wouldn't it be neat for the dreamers and the planners of Fredericksburg in the future to put the replica back in Main Street where it was? Maybe we'll ever get a bypass that might happen. It's always fun to dream. We also had the Taj House, and that was our house. I say our house because when you're in high school and you're a member of the junior historian and the German club, you got to have your Christmas party in it. So we built fires in that big chimney, that fireplace that you can see from the outside. Those were things that were important to us. And then we had shooting festivals. I'm not going to dare pronounce that in German for you because you might not understand it, okay? And then we had the Singer Fest. I've never been to either one of those, but I want those institutions to continue, and they are at the heart of people who grew up in this county. Now, tourists like the LBJ Ranch, and of course, I think LBJ died in the early 70s. I forget the exact date, but the ranch continued to draw people. And that was good. Enchanted Rock became a state park, and we started to have to share it with other people in the state. I don't know if we're that happy about it, but I really hate that sign going north and it says you can't come any further because it's closed, it's booked. That's really interesting to me. And they don't let you in at night anymore. And then like Dr. Fraser pointed out, suddenly there was Luckenbach. And that gave us a new look and a new identity, and we weren't really so sure about that crowd. My commissioners used to fuss about the number of people that they had to arrest on weekends. I said, wait a minute, have you looked at the county budget? 25% of our budget comes from the fines we levy on them. There was one thing, though, that affected visitors, and it was peaches. And if they froze out and word got out, nobody came. That's the truth, because I ran a roadside market, I know. We have the damnedest time to get peach growers to shut up with reporters. Don't say anything. Don't give a hint. I've been asked just within the last 2 months, is how did the freeze affect the peach crop, the peach blossoms? I said it was January, end of January, beginning of February. You ever heard of dormancy? I mean, peaches grow in Canada. Look how cold it gets up there. So people don't know, so you have to be very careful what you say and when you say it. Okay, I want to mention OPEC. Remember that? Was it good for Fredericksburg? 55 miles per hour, was that good? Absolutely it was, because people took shorter trips out of Austin, out of San Antonio. We had a boom in visitors, so that was good for us. COVID was really pretty good for us. I haven't talked to other merchants, but it's been fantastic for us. What about gas prices when they hit $10 a gallon? What's going to happen then? So I don't know whether we're going to continue the growth, whether we can go past all those things. We just don't know. Everything's usually pretty relative. Well, Lee Ethel saw all of this. He saw what was happening when he got here in the late 70s. And he became a part of it, he became a leader of it. Now, that doesn't mean that we weren't doing things ourselves. trying to promote tourism. I don't think we knew what the end result was going to be. But we formed several organizations. One of them was the Fredericksburg Shopkeepers Guild. And we created a market called Christkindl Market. Did you ever go to one of those? You couldn't set up a booth and sell 5 and 10 cent stuff. You had to have crafted stuff, preferably out of Germany, high quality. And we limited the size of that event. But you know what happened? Merchants up and down Main Street used to come to us more than once. This happened and said, you know, I don't know what you're doing on the Christkindl Market, on the Market Square, but we had the best day in sales on Main Street we've ever had. So there's a reciprocal effect that goes elsewhere, and that was good, and we knew it was working. And people began to take notice of what we were doing. Then we created the Fredericksburg Heritage Federation. And we put on the wildest wild game dinner you can imagine. It was a drunken feast that was unbelievable. We gathered antelope, bear, we had bear meat donated, we had raccoons, rattlesnakes, the turkey plant gave us thousands of turkey fries. We had a fest that was unbelievable. And we took all that stuff to local restaurants and said, hey, cook this to this recipe and we'll pick it up the night before. And we served it. You think the health department will let us do that today? We had a blast doing that thing, and it wasn't just a few people, it was dozens of people. This town has a volunteer spirit that is unchallenged in any other community. They volunteered again and again and again, and there were just tens of dozens of people that helped us do that. With the first money, $10,000 that we netted from the first wild game dinner, paid our liquor bill, we had $10,000 left. And we told the Catholic Church we want to put a new roof on your church because we're worried about that building. They had to get permission from the Pope to let us Protestants do that. Some of us, I'm kidding, of course. But that was our focus. We already knew in the early 70s that these buildings were precious to us. And I want to tell you that next to this building stood a 2-story hotel called the La Mesa. I think it might be right, La Mesa Hotel. And of course it got torn down. I've seen so many buildings torn down. But by the mid-70s, that was coming to an end, kind of a self-imposed thing. Not by law, but just because we felt like these buildings were worth preserving. We also restored the old county jail. You know that thing staying behind the courthouse? We had Ty Cox helped us. He was a local. But he was also engaged with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to restore all the forts in the 70s across the West. So he helped us remodel and give us guidance on the old jail. We got it all ready, we got it cleaned out, we fixed it, we did everything to it, and we handed the keys to the county commissioner's court. Says, now it's up to you to promote how you're going to use this in tourism or whatever you do with it, but please keep it. Well, they honored that for about 4 years, and then they jumped it up. Now I understand they're emptying it again. They should be 99% finished. I've given up following some of these things. We also built a fountain with funds by the courthouse, that little beautiful fountain you see there, and throw in a dime every now and then. We did that. And toward the end of it, they started working on Fort Martin Scott. And look how Fort Martin Scott has bloomed, not because of the city came in and helped. I don't know what happened to the Heritage Federation, but we did a lot of things. The chamber also sponsored Old Night in Fredericksburg, and that was a big boom, and that started going. And we begged them to come to market plots, bring it to town. I mean, this is Fredericksburg, let's do it here. And so for many years, they did it right there on Market Square. Now they've gone back to the courthouse, to the county fairgrounds. I don't know why, but that's what they've done. So Ethel saw a lot of opportunity. And he created then the Pedernales Valley Creative Arts Alliance. I don't know if I got that right. But the end result is they put on the first Oktoberfest in 1981. And that was a thing that really started drawing people to town. And it's still going strong. So he had a vision that other people maybe didn't really see where it was going to wind up. And it was really a good event. So when you have a lot of tourists in town, you have to be able to feed them. I'm going to point out there were some restaurants that started opening up. You remember Immigrants Landing? The gallery, the Domino Parlor. God, I ate so many hoagies there. I should weigh 300 pounds. Hilltop Cafe has been around since 1980. Whoever thought Cajun food would fly in the hill country? Then, of course, we had German restaurants for the first time. Friedhelmsbavarian Inn and the Lindenbaum. And everybody was coming on board. Now, when you have a lot of tourists, you also need to house them. You gotta have something for them to stay in. I think at the time, the best little motel we had was the Ranch Motel. It was designed by Albert Keitel. I don't know, in the late 40s or the late 30s or the early 40s, but it was really cute and it was nice. But it couldn't handle any influx of tourists, and so the Sunny House Motel was great. It had that big fireplace out front, so they were capturing part of the identity of Fredericksburg. And then, of course, Ken Knopf started the first bed and breakfast, and look where that is today. I mean, we're the bed and breakfast capital of the world. I don't know if the city is happy about that, but maybe nobody's left to vote for the new council members. I don't know. It's a good industry. It's a clean industry, and the nice thing about tourism, they come into town, they spend the night, they spend their money, and they go home broke. That's what we want. We also had the first wineries, and the first wineries, like Overhelmham, Great Creek, and Pedernales Winery. Remember that one? You remember Haversack? Anybody? Is somebody boo on that? Hey, I sold a lot of their product. Yeah. And there was even an earlier one was 4 Hour that was out on Cave Creek. So we had wine, but wines when they first came out, the first vineyards, wasn't really a big takeoff. It sat there for a long time, and now it's boomed. It's unbelievable what's happened. The final thing that you have to have is you have to provide shopping for people. So you can feed them, you bring them to town, you entertain them, but sooner or later they're going to want to eat. And I think I want to point out the Peachtree Gift Gallery was one of the first really restaurants that went upscale. They started in '73, but look how they mushroomed in that. Look how other restaurants have popped up since then. I also want to mention Showcase Antique. Not because they were specialists in sterling and in crystal, but they gave quality, and they had customers that came all over the state, if not out of state, because they were building that reputation. And those are the type of places that we wanted in town. Then I want to mention Maine Bookshop. That was my friend Bob Gates, but he would host, well, he sold books, of course. We bought books, we didn't know why, but we bought a lot of books. But he would host signings, and one of the persons he brought in was Buck Shewitz, who was a famous Texas artist that did sketches for Umlo Oil. If you were a kid in school, you got a big manual that had all the Texas history on it. He was helpful with that. But he did some Fredericksburg houses, but he did the big ones. He did the courthouse, he did St. Mary's Church, he did the Taj House, he did the Feinskirche, and of course the White Elephant Saloon. Those were the biggies. And that's where Lee Ethel